Okay, so now I want to talk about the arguments for psychological egoism. And I put arguments here because there isn't really much in the way of argument for psychological egoism. Most of the people I've ever met, right, all of the people I've ever met who thought that psychological egoism was true actually completely lacked arguments for it. Basically, what they would do is restate psychological egoism in different words and then say it was a reason. But it's not. It's just saying the same thing in different words. It's the fallacy of begging the question. It's not an argument. So what I've got 4 arguments is an argument based on desire. We always do what we desire, so therefore we're always acting in our own self-interest. Well, that wouldn't be psychological egoism. That would be psychological desirism. And it is, in fact, a fact that we don't always do things we desire. Sometimes we do things that we don't desire to do, sometimes for selfish motives, and sometimes we desire that someone else be better off, that someone else not be suffering, and so we will, at some cost to ourselves, go and help that person. So there are unselfish desires. So the fact that people always act on their desires doesn't prove that we're universally selfish. Same thing for pleasure. Although, you know, we don't always do things that we find pleasant. Sometimes we do things, unpleasant things now because we expect to get more pleasure later. But sometimes we do unpleasant things because we think it's a moral duty, because we're helping someone. Right? So it's not all about pleasure. And by the way, if it's about pleasure rather than self-interest, that would be psychological hedonism, saying that everybody's motivated by pleasure rather than self-interest. And that would mean that people who accumulate wealth but don't enjoy themselves prove that psychological egoism is false. If you change the definition of self-interest so that it matches desire or pleasure, you change the doctrine, and then you change its relationship with the evidence. So the fact that a lot of people seek to get rich when they're not enjoying it, and they don't seem to enjoy their lives later on, would prove it false. Motivation. We always do what we're motivated to do. We decide our own motivations. Therefore, we always act on our own self-interest. But we don't actually decide our motivations. People spend thousands of dollars on therapy to get their motivations untangled. I mean, have you ever done something that you really wanted to do that was not in your best interest, and afterwards you go, I really wish I hadn't done that? Well, if we always act on our motivations, that proves that psychological egoism is false, because our motivations are not always in our own best interest. Finally, there's a sort of whateverism kind of thing that if I were to offer an example of someone making a sacrifice to help others, like I read a story of a German soldier who manned a machine gun while his comrades were able to run away from advancing Russian soldiers. And he told them, I'm not fit for civilian life. I'll keep them back as long as I can while you guys get away. Saved a bunch of his buddies' lives, but he died. If it's good to have your life saved, then he paid a massive cost to save his buddies. And someone will say, well, you know, he got the satisfaction of saving his buddies. Well, can you prove that he felt a sense of satisfaction while he was doing this? If I was manning a machine gun against advancing Russian soldiers, I'd be losing control of my bodily functions in fear. I would not feel a sense of satisfaction. And second, if you help someone and you get a sense of satisfaction, well, that's because you wanted to help the person, and that's unselfish. You didn't do it for the satisfaction. That's not the motive. You get the satisfaction because it's what you wanted to do, and you did this thing that you wanted to accomplish. nobody acts simply to get a sense of satisfaction from the results of their action. They act to get the results of their action. And so this is just sort of a terrible way to defend psychological egoism. It's logically incoherent. Every defense of psychological egoism I've ever seen involves changing the name, changing the definition of self-interest to fit a particular case. But when you change it so that it fits one case, it stops fitting the others. Imagine I talk about someone who gives money to charity. You know, there's a beggar or a charity beggar there, and someone gives money to help others. And I say, look, there's an altruistic act. Oh, well, he got satisfaction from helping the others. Well, then everybody who walked by, everyone else who walked by without giving money was acting against their own self-interest because they were passing up that satisfaction. They too could have gotten exactly the same satisfaction by handing over some money there, but they didn't. So they acted against their own self-interest, and they proved psychological egoism is false.